will, because I tend to butcher things like that. He's one of the good guys in this room, and he will make sure to fight always for everything that's right around peering and the industry. Over to Nishal.
So, on the short walk up here, I was pondering what it means to be a good guy. Because yesterday I was called one of you thieving crooks. And I'm wondering how that has changed overnight. Malcolm, you've got to explain that to me. No? So the clicker's not working. I'm going to have to do the next slide thing, please. No toys to play with. Mark Tinker asked me to speak. Mark said, Nishal, there's a lot of things that have changed at the Internet Exchange Point. So if you don't know, if Malcolm didn't mention it, INX-ZA, or what some of you might know as ISPA, has been running Internet Exchange Points since 1996. That's a long time. And looking at the average age in this room, I'm going to guess it was before most of you were online. So we've been at this a while. And of course, if you've been doing something for a long time, what happens is that over time, things change, things become different, things get better. And Mark asked me to recap some of that stuff for you, to walk you through the journey. So the very first slide would have been the explanation of journey and what the Apple dictionary tells you a journey is. But I think this is a more interesting one. And I hope that rather than just listening to me, or perhaps in addition to just listening to me, you've been reading the wall of text that's been confronted, that you're confronted with. Apologies, I don't usually do slides like this, but I thought it was useful. It's an article that appeared in SA Computing in, well, it's cut off there. It's meant to say in 1998. And it's talking about the purchase of a new switch at the time. It was a Cisco Catalyst switch that had 100 megabit ports and 2 uplinks that were 1 gigabit each. And this was the fantastic investment in network infrastructure that was done in 2008 to enable us to be able to continue to provide internet peering services way back then. And I think there's a number at the bottom, 16 megabits a second. So a curious piece of history, but a good start for our journey, I think. So if we can, next slide, please. Thank you. So because I like history, I thought it might be useful for you to see how we've progressed over the years. Part of that has been what has run the infrastructure. So for those of you that have been online for a while, or in South Africa for a while, you'd known that the Jinx in particular has run out of a single data center in Parklands for a long time, Rosebank Parklands area. So speaking about that magical catalyst layer, it was a layer 3 switch, by the way. 2008, so roughly 10 years on, and the fabric changed to this fantastic Cisco 4900M. In 2008, we were very pleased to add 10 gigabit ports. And you're probably thinking, what are those fat things at the bottom? Those were the then Sam Charlie interfaces, X2, I think they were called, that Cisco were using at the time. That switch was one of 2 that was donated to us, and uninterrupted for 8 years. In fact, it would have been on longer than that, but I believe the co-location facility did some maintenance in November, and that's why the online date you'll see is started, there we go, November 3rd, 2010. So they've been up for a long time. Exchanges have been running well in South Africa for a long time, and we've gotten the hang of peering. We've done this a lot better than a lot of other countries, and we've gotten really good. We have really good representation from the community. We have really good representation from the parties that need to be. in particular the regulator and the Department of Communications, Department of DTPS, whatever they're calling themselves these days, they know well enough that the peering ecosystem in South Africa works really well. Because you, the people that peer at the exchanges, know that you know how to make things work. They largely stay out of our way. And that's largely how we've been able to keep the peering ecosystem continuously working. And I think that's fantastic. And the people that, really the people that deserve congratulations for that are not people like me that come and talk about it, but people like you who decided 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, that peering was important, and this is what you needed to do to continue to grow your businesses. So from the very first fateful 4 that started to the, I guess, 500 networks now that peer across South Africa, the congratulations is yours. But of course, we moved on, so if we can get to the next slide, please. Funny thing, there was a really cool security bug in that version of code. I'm looking at that right now. And anybody could SNMP query the switch, even though they were ACLs. It was the second ever version of code that switch ran. And we never thought to change it because we thought nobody's really going to want to query the switch. Of course, they don't work anymore. In 2012, I came back to South Africa, and the ISPA folk and I sat down and we said, this is how we want to make the exchanges better. We want to grow the internet exchanges. And we came up with a few action plans. Now, if you were familiar with the single site that I'm talking about, the Internet Solutions Data Center in Rosebank, you'd know that at the time there were other very popular, large emerging data centers that were coming out. And it was important to start to think, how do we get out of the single location and try to get into multiple locations so we can grow the exchange? So I went on a fact-finding mission, and I actually went up to DKIX. I met someone who is has exceptional common sense, who I am glad is in the audience today. And he told me probably the single most useful thing I had in the 2.5 days that I spent with his team. And that is, keep things simple. So thank you, Arnold. It was good wisdom then, and I stand by that today. It's also what we try to teach. So when we were thinking about how do we go multi-site, this idea of how do we make the exchange work between sites came up. If you know me, you know that I hate MPLS. I know that some of you feel differently. That is your problem, not mine. There are a lot better ways to do things, and this idea about wanting to run MPLS or VPLS and then running an exchange across it, it wasn't something that was making sense to me at the time. But we were thinking about growing, and we were thinking about moving into additional facilities. And the question was, how do you scale to build all of this? And the existing mechanism, which is basically 3 switches, which were in one data center, didn't quite work for us if we were going to try to go across the city and incorporate a whole new infrastructure. So yeah, as much as I hate to say it, it was always at the back of my head. Next slide, please. I was here the last time iWeek ran, and I was on the stage in this room saying that I think multi-site is not a good thing because it is expensive. And I cautioned against doing it, but the message that came from you, the people who were peering, was that we want this. We want you to build the internet exchange, and we want you to continue to span into different cities. And seeing as how you're the ones that are paying for it, I'm happy to do whatever you'd like. So if you were going to build internet infrastructure of any sort of kind, whether you're building an internet exchange point or whether you're building a new routing POP, this is kind of the infrastructure, the architecture that you'd want. And you'll hear a lot more about this from someone who's a lot smarter than I am a little later on, so I'm not going to describe it. But the concept is simple. You would have 2 core devices in every single POP, and those 2 core devices interconnect with the other core devices, and somehow they manage to route through them, okay? And if you wanted to add access kit, next slide, please. I should say Siri, next slide. That should make this a bit more interesting. And if you wanted to add access kit, like the little green blocks that I've drawn in, you basically add access kit that would then dual connect to every single POP to the 2 core devices. As I said, someone's going to talk a lot more about this architecture and how it works better, so I'm not going to discuss the architecture itself. But the problem is that when you're trying to build into multiple locations across the city, and where every single one of those long links basically is either a lit lambda that you're either purchasing across the city or a lit 10 gig service or dark fiber, it doesn't become easy, and it's expensive to try to get this thing done. So when we first went multi-site, we went according to what the vendor recommendations were at the time, which was use VPLS. So I bit my tongue, and I've done this before, by the way. I've got lots of sins around MPLS. We can talk about that at the bar. But I bit my tongue, and we got VPLS working primarily because we were promised that you would get fantastic load sharing. We've gone through the vendor evaluation process. They basically labbed everything that we'd asked them to do. And they showed us how we would get this fantastic load sharing, even though we were looking inside the MPLS headers. Things will just work, they said. Famous last words. Of course, it never works that way. Today, we ended up with something that looks a lot like, next slide, please. Today, we have something, and this is for the jinx. I'll talk about the others in a second. We have something that looks a lot like this. At least this was the status yesterday when I snapped it. So you can see that traffic moves. It kind of moves, and as long as it doesn't get to red, as long as it doesn't get to yellow, which leads to orange, which leads to red, I'm not overly concerned. As long as the traffic flows, I don't care. But this is still inherently not what we want to achieve. So a little later this year, I guess, we're going to go through the process of saying install proper provider equipment, core equipment, provider PE type stuff, access equipment that we can do it at the edge, and then connect peers into that the way that you would normally expect. The catch is when you have a remote site and it's got 5 peers, kind of difficult to spend good few $1,000s, and here you're looking at between 10 to 15, depending on the kind of switches you want, just to have 5 peers on it to say, well, we want to put this infrastructure in place that's going to have dedicated core and dedicated access gear. So we mix and match like pretty much everyone in this room expects us to do. We also learned, fantastically enough, that VPLS isn't cool. It doesn't scale well. Because every time we need to add a new switch, a new access device to this network, we then need to have VPLS tunnels to everything else. So it's that whole IBGP internal full mesh scheme all over again, and not so pretty, not something we want to be doing, particularly at an exchange. One thing we pride ourselves on is the fact that the exchange is highly available. And that's largely because I don't touch anything because I don't have to make changes all the time. And some of you are laughing, but human error is one of the biggest problems with stability. So we really try our best to make sure things work first time round. And then aside from simply just unshutting a port to add peer and putting them into the appropriate VLAN, it's a largely hands-off environment. Next slide, please. When we built Cape Town, when we took Cape Town as an extension site, we thought, bugger this, we're not doing VPLS, we're doing VXLAN because it's the new buzzword. Also because we run OSPF in the background, and I like OSPF. I think it's cool, and I can do tricks with it in a way that makes sense to me. So we've been using this as the basis for building the Cape Town, and what we're going to change the Durban Internet Exchange to. The Durban Internet Exchange is multi-site as well. It was actually the first one we took multi-site, but it's only 2 sites, so it doesn't matter. And we're going to convert that to VXLAN and new equipment a little later this year as well. So if you're thinking about building an exchange, VXLAN, good. MPLS, bad. But I didn't need to tell you that, right? We all know about that about MPLS. Next slide, please. What we did spend time on this year, and something that I do want to talk a little bit about, because you've already heard someone talk about it now, and apologies if you were in the room yesterday, it's something that I've said already, but between yesterday and this changed, except me being one of the good guys. So we spent a lot of time this year, and we're going to continue to spend a lot of time this year talking about security, because it is something that it's important for all of us, not just in the way that we run our businesses and in the way that we expect other people to conduct their businesses with us, but it's important to us as a national asset. And I keep talking about this, I think maybe sometimes to the wrong people, but if we don't develop this relationship for South Africa trying to do the right thing, if we don't develop this relationship for the region as a whole, not just South Africa, trying to do the right thing, to setting reasonably good goals and exceeding them, people are not going to want to take us seriously in the business environment. And that means that we need the elements that build security. We need to have stable, secure internet exchange points. You have that. You're welcome. You need to have stable, secure networks. Not such a good picture from the other side. We need to have mechanisms for interaction, certs, and things you don't really want to hear me preach about right now. So let's talk about the exchange and operator relationship. You've heard Susan mention what you should be doing as a network in order to make sure that you have good network hygiene and to encourage people peering with you. And that's been the focus of what we've been trying to get folks to do. So we've done training this year, and we will continue to do training, and we will even do even more training, not on IPv6, because that's hectically boring and nobody really wants to be trained on IPv6 anymore, because, well, we've all done that. But on routing security and things that make a difference, or things that should be making a difference to you. There's a shocking number of domestic networks that do not know how to use the Internet Routing Registry. And part of that is our fault. Let me be clear about that. When I say our, I mean the generation of network people like myself, those of us that are in our late 20s and moving on. We haven't, I'm not 20. Didn't think you'd believe that. I was waiting for the laugh, but now because I'm incapable of lying, I'm going to confess. The network engineers like myself who were online 20 years ago and were building things, and perhaps we didn't do the right thing. Perhaps we didn't teach the folks that came after us all the right rules. Because I can tell you, engaging with a lot of these people, there's this huge knowledge gap that we have to fill. So if you're still in an operator, I hope you're an operator, that you're still sitting in this room. Please make sure you're documenting. Please make sure you're passing on all the things folks need to know about, because it's coming back to bite us. And the way we're fixing this, as I said, is through training. We're doing not V6, but we're doing routing security training, and we want to continue doing this sort of stuff. Next slide, please. We had this before and after metric for saying, how are we going to know that the training we're doing is working? I'm sorry if you can't see the slides, but this is a snapshot of what you would see if you logged into the INX portal. INX portal as one of the larger networks that's connected. And we often hear this excuse from the transit networks: we don't filter, we just set max prefix and we're happy to go with that. It's difficult, it's complicated, costs time, takes money. Insert excuse here. These are routes that are being filtered from this particular provider, and you'll see a variety of reasons. Routes entries missing out of the Internet Routing Registry, RPKI invalids, which should be dropped, and the third one that I noticed this morning was that it's leaking a transit-free ASN to us. So a network that typically you would not see at an internet exchange point, this network thinks it's okay to give transit to that so-called tier 1 network. Fantastic. Now, there are many of you that have done this, and there are many of you that have fixed it after it's done. And I always say it's okay to get stuff wrong. Everybody makes mistakes. I did one in 2006 once. At least you're awake, eh? But please, the tools are there for you. This is the key thing. The key thing is not that you're making a mistake. The key thing is that there's a way for you to check what you're doing, and there's a way for you to fix it without hurting the internet, without hurting the exchange point, I should say. So please go, if you're an INX peer, log into the portal, go to the filtered prefixes, make sure you don't see something like this. It's really, really, really not the kind of things we want to see. I want to say thank you to the networks that I've written to and have fixed stuff. And some of you here, I'm not going to call out your names unless you want me to. No one's putting their hands up. But thank you for fixing things. I don't just write to you because I'm bored at 2 a.m. Trust me, I have other things to do. But every step you take towards filtering the internet does make things better for us. Next slide, please. Also, a mention about the RPKI invalid stuff. So you know, because I did not. About June this year, I actually discovered that Cisco iOS XE drops RPKI invalids by default. That means you actually don't need to configure stuff. You simply need on your router to say, here is an RPKI cache that I trust, and hopefully it's one you've set up. And if you don't know how to set it up, ask for help. There are people in our community that will help you. And that's it. You configure the cache, your router does the lookups, and it will drop the invalid. So a lot of noise that's being made on the internet now about how you should be dropping invalids, and this becomes a no-brainer for you if you simply add an RPKI cache, which is not a difficult thing to do. There's instructions on our website on how you can do that. So please consider it. It's something, even if you're not using RPKI today, it's something you can do to make your little network safer. This picture is one that I pulled off the NLNet Labs page, and those of you that were here yesterday, you would have seen it as well. It records the accuracy for the ROAs, route origin attestations, that are supposedly linked to South Africa. And you can see that this is an accuracy rating of 98.4%. It was actually higher than this at one point. It was 99.7. Earlier this year, a whole bunch of networks went into this feeding gorgy where you just decided you were going to register ROAs without knowing what you were doing and stuff out. And that number was down to 77%. Please don't. I want to say this very clearly. You stand the chance of hurting your network if you do this incorrectly. So instead of just shooting into the dark and hoping you're doing this right, put your hand up, reach out to Malcolm. He's sitting somewhere. There he is. Identify yourself, tell him you'd like to be part of the training programs that we're running, and we'll happily get you in on one of the courses and work with you to get this number up. That jump from 77 to 97 happened only because we could sit down with networks and say, this is what you're doing wrong. And that's a big part of what we want to see happen, that we work together as a community to make sure that our internet is more secure overall. Next slide, please. Also part of that journey, Mark asked me to name and shame a few people. So part of that journey was also figuring out not just what it is that makes our exchange safer, the exchange point itself, but the elements around it. So don't try and read the slide, you're not supposed to. You can't see it, I hope you can't. But it's proof that INX.net.ZA performs DNSSEC validation, at least for the domain. You can do DNSSEC validation for that. And while you're going to say, Nishal, really? You told us not to get excited about RPKI or MPLS. DNSSEC is just as old. It is. But the process to get here was not. Because the process to get net.za assigned and to get net.za to work meant that we had to call up Zadna routinely every 2 weeks to say that there is a faulty name server inside net.za that is stripping out RR SIGs. Please remove this. And I have mail that I sent every 2 weeks for just under a year and a half. That is a lot of email saying, please remove this faulty name server because it is causing a problem for us. Something else we had to do, so aside from just helping net.za to become more resilient to things like DNSSEC and work for things like DNSSEC, sorry, we worked with the Afrinic team to help get their services updated. Afrinic didn't support algorithm 13, but to their credit, we reported it to them. And we said, guys, fix this. This is the default in Power DNS. We think you should support defaults at base level. The Afrinic guys said they'd finished it in 2 weeks, and to their credit, they did, so great. For me, the message here is that there's a lot of things that we could be doing as a community to make the internet better. We've been doing some of them, but we can't nail all of them down. And we want to work with you to continue to do this, because ticking off all of these important boxes, making sure that you've got RPKI in place, getting DNSSEC done, doing DNSSEC validation inside your networks. I won't start talking about that, don't worry. These are all important parts of making your network better. Next slide, please. And if I think he's just left the room, he always manages to do this. This is for two people, Mark and the other guy who was laughing at FreeBSD. So I'd like to let you know that we worked with the FreeBSD Foundation, and they now have a FreeBSD mirror, the first of its kind, that is run by the FreeBSD Foundation inside Johannesburg. So for the guy that was saying something about FreeBSD t-shirts and regs, firstly, when you're ready to stop washing your car and start running real networks, you can get real operating systems that's going to be close to an internet exchange point close to you. I'm excited about FreeBSD because I'm old and I like it and it's stable, and I hate System D, and we can talk about the rest later. But thank you. I'm here all week. But I think it's more than that. I think, and this goes back to what I was talking about earlier on. 20 years ago, we had FreeBSD mirrors in South Africa. We had Linux mirrors in South Africa. We had a whole bunch of things, but over time, a lot of this has devolved. We've seemed to have lost this around the way, and I, for one, am not sure why. I'm willing to take the blame for not having made sure that the people at ISP that I worked for were not necessarily well-trained and documented. But I don't know what happened to the community resources we had 20 years ago, and it worries me. It worries me that that community is sort of slacking. And I'm thrilled to see the fantastic new engagement that's happening. The provincial NOGs that have been set up talks about having big ZANOGs next year and stuff like that. And I hope we get better. And I hope we do more things like this for each other. because this is the sort of stuff that we need to help grow our internet. So this is about FreeBSD, and so I can poke fun at Mark and the other guy, but it's also about saying, how do we get to work together to make things like this, more things like this happen for all of us? And I think that's an important part of moving forward. Next slide, please. I'm at the sponsors bit, so you can tell I'm leaving. A piece of news that I have for you, for those of you that follow INX-ZA, we've been recently blessed. DFA has agreed to provide dark fiber for us along 2 of our parts. So we'll be in a position to not just purchase lit circuits the way that we've been doing before. I'm a lazy guy. I like sleeping at 3 in the morning. So waking up to do things like checking light levels has always been something I really didn't want to do. But because of the way the networks have grown, of course, with new CDNs coming on board, we need to be able to support that. And thank you, DFA, for providing dark fiber so that I can now be awake at 3 a.m., at least for a good reason. And we hope that this is going to scale and bring you all the things you expect of Exchange nicely. Next slide, please. This is it. This is the last slide. Thank you as well. INX is a community project. I know people equate INX with ISPA, and that's true. The exchanges were started by the Service Providers Association, but since about 6 years, I guess now, we've been run pretty much autonomously. So there's a committee that manages and makes decisions, and the ISPA guys are just there to take the legal flak if we ever run into anything legal. So thank you to the ISPA guys for doing that. That's I'm making light of it, but it's a brave thing to do, to trust me that you're not going to get sued. But I do want to thank the folks here. So you'll see the list of sponsors that we have: IS, Liquid, Terraco, eNetworks, Africa Data Centers, eThekwini, the Durban Metro, and I don't know how to say this, so I might get it wrong. It's Xenilio. If it wasn't for you, these community-run projects wouldn't exist. They wouldn't continue to exist and grow. Thank you. We appreciate your support. And we hope you continue to support us. There is one more slide, I think, before I let Randy at the mic. And because it's a journey, I also thought that it would be curious and funny if you recounted a little piece of history. So this is from the Sunday magazine. The Sunday Times became the Sunday magazine, and it was posted in 1999. If my broadband and those people, if you're in the room, you'll be glad to know that even in those days, the media was getting stuff wrong. They mistook switch for server, but us geeks don't think much of those things. So thank you very much. I hope it's been marginally interesting to you. I'm around questions about how we do things. If you want to volunteer assistance or anything like that, you can grab a hold of me, Malcolm, or any of the other INX guys that are here. Merci beaucoup.
Thanks, Nishal. Again, 2 microphones are available. I see Randy's already on his way.
I only need one. Randy Bush, IJ Anarchist. RFC 8481, Section 5. Once routes are evaluated and have their state set, the operator should be in complete control of any policy applied based on the evaluation state. Absent specific operator configuration, policy must not be applied. In other words, what you said is use a bug. Cisco XE should not be applying policy by default.
Okay, noted. I don't write code for Cisco, but I'll be sure to pay attention to that and refer to it as a bug.
Mark Tinker, CCOM. Thanks, Nishal. I think just to add to what Randy was saying, this is a known issue that Cisco have been trying to fix since, I don't know, Randy, 2015 maybe, and it's still present.
So yeah, I mean, we've got lots of bugs that have worked for us over years. I'm not close to the iOS developers anymore. I don't really run a network. I can't tell you if they're going to remove it or not. Randy is in a much better position than I am. Personally, I don't know. Dropping invalids doesn't necessarily seem like a bad thing if it's made available to me.
So in Cisco land, they think it's a feature.
Or a caveat. Caveat, I think, is the word they use.
No, it's actually a feature. It's actually documented as part of the process.
It's a feature.
It's hard to revert. There are people like you that rely on the behavior, if they're reverted, you're going to get violation of POLA, principle of least astonishment. But, you know, you can ignore 88481. It was written by some Seattle hippie.
To be clear, I actually didn't know this. I was helping somebody during the recent African Internet Summit. And after we did this, he asked me, well, why are you doing that when XE says blah, what Mark's saying? So it was news to me as well.
And work online. Yeah, it is a bug, it is a violation. I've told them as well. They are making noises about fixing it. It comes with a whole bunch of other features that you can't turn off that make life very, very difficult if you're operating a transit network that actually needs to apply policy that aren't, you know, one size fits all. Randy's right that this is difficult for them to roll back. It's going to be a hell of a lot harder for them to roll back 3 or 4 years from now. And so it would be, you know, helpful if the community of operators as a whole was speaking with one voice and asking them to as quickly as possible.
I'm not going to do that, to be clear.
Please.
No.
Pretty please.
With sugar on it?
choose your own vendor.
Ben and Mark and a friend, Jade Borgenhagen at AT&T, are the first to roll out in production on real networks, dropping invalids. They are being very polite and, by my reading, far too quiet in warning people of the problems with the vendors, especially Cisco. And the code is not only in violation of spec, but has actual breakage that you have to work around. You can't run all their releases. If you would speak, I would gladly get out of your way, Ben, because I'm just proxying what you're being too polite to say.
I'm being mysterious rather than polite. I have a slot at 4 p.m. tomorrow where I'm talking about exactly the subject. But you're absolutely, Randy's exactly right. We had a much harder time rolling out origin validation and a much harder time to switch on as a result of the behavior that we're describing. But, you know, a microphone discussion is not maybe the best time.
I wouldn't plan on running it on XE, period. Run it XR only.
XR has some of the same quirks, just not all of them. Anyway, that's the last of it.
Any non-RPKI related questions? We can have the RPKI discussion later. I'm not shying none from you. And I'll tell you why I support this in XE. No? All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nishal. So we're very fortunate in South Africa that we actually have 2 very well-run exchange points in 3 of our major cities. And the diversity that it offers all our operators, content providers is pretty impressive. Our next speaker is going to give us a quick rundown on NAP Africa. Andrew has been in the industry. Well, you can see how big his beard is.